Good evening and welcome. I'm Diane Meyerhoff, host for tonight's candidate forum for state representative in Chittenden District 3, Jericho Underhill, and District 4-1 in Charlotte. Tonight's show is being aired live on Channel 17 and streamed live on the Channel 17 website. We welcome your comments and questions. Please join the conversation at 862-3966. Candidates joining me tonight are the three Democratic incumbents, George Till and Trevor Sqirrell from Chittenden 3, and Mike Yantachka from Chittenden 4-1. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. The candidates are running unopposed, so we're going to conduct the forum in more of a forum than as a debate. However, each candidate will make an opening statement, and then we'll discuss topics of interest to voters. So, George, tell us why you're running and what qualifies you for the position. What are your priorities as we come into the next session?
Thank you, Diane. I've been in the legislature now for 5 terms, 10 years, and although I've had some real successes along the way, there are some priorities that I have that really haven't gotten across the finish line yet, and I really want to continue on and press for those. In particular, the things that that I'm really interested in this year is raising the smoking age to 21. The problem of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, in Vermont, and how that impacts our healthcare spending, our schools, our social services, and our corrections departments, as well as our economy. In addition, we need to have an excise tax on electronic cigarettes. I want to push once again for primary enforcement of our seatbelt law, and paid family leave is a big priority for me again this year. So that's why I want to be there. The second reason I like to be there is a lot of times the discussion is very negative about Vermont, and I'd like to emphasize that there are a lot of very good things about Vermont. You know, Vermont is rated by WalletHub as being the best state in the country to have a baby. We are one of the safest states, either number 1 or number 2, depending on which poll you look at. We have some of the best public schools. Again, WalletHub calls our schools the 5th best in the country. The Opportunity Index says that Vermont is the best state to be born in. We have a low unemployment rate, and so we have a very low infant death rate. We have a relatively low maternal mortality rate. There are just so many good things about Vermont, and I think the negative things are often overstated. The issue around the taxes in Vermont and those sort of things. I think there's a lot of opinion about that, but sometimes the facts don't exactly line up with a lot of what's said. So that's why I'm running again.
Okay, sounds like an ambitious agenda. Thank you, George. Trevor.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm the newbie of the 3 here. I'll be going into my 2nd term. Thoroughly enjoyed my 1st term. Challenging, interesting, learned a lot. I've always felt that serving your community is a very important thing to do. I moved to Underhill in 2000, and I've been there for 18 years now. I got involved in more of a local community in terms of the Conservation Commission, ended up chairing the Conservation Commission, and also ended up being a member on the Planning Commission and chairing the Planning Commission. At one time, I was chairing both at the same time, and I don't recommend that to anybody. So obviously, I have a strong interest in environmental issues, and I carry that over into the State House. I always had an interest in running as a legislator, but didn't know if the opportunity would present itself. And the opportunity did present itself 2 years ago when incumbent Bill Frank retired after 12 years. And I saw that as my opportunity to see what it was like to campaign and politic and become a part of the legislature. And I was fortunate to win. And I got my choice to be on the Natural Resources Committee, so I got to delve into those issues that are probably closest to me, which are water quality, solid waste, and also issues around forest fragmentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Trevor. Appreciate it. Mike, tell us.
Yes, Mike Yantachka, and I represent Charlotte and part of Heinsberg. I've been in the legislature for 8 years, and I'm there to work for values and opportunities to benefit all Vermonters. I've served on the Natural Resource and Energy Committee for 6 years, and then that committee was split up into 2 committees. Actually, the responsibilities went to 2 different committees. A new committee was created, Energy and Technology Committee, which I'm on, and the Natural Resources part went to the committee that Trevor's on. So my focus has been on the environment and renewable energy. And I want to continue working for the aspects, the energy aspects, and the committee also has responsibility for telecommunications and the IT infrastructure of the Vermont government. So there's a lot of work to be done there, not only with the energy issues, but also bringing broadband to throughout Vermont, and making sure that our computer systems are secure, and the data that we have on Vermonters is secure as well. So, Vermont families need a healthy environment, and so we need clean air and clean water, and that's an essential part of what Vermont is. So we want to continue to have that. Education issues. Every child deserves an excellent public education system so that they can become productive citizens and develop to their full potential. So we need to continue supporting that. And we all need access to affordable health care, safe communities to raise our kids, and economic opportunities so that if you're working 40 hours a week, you earn enough money to live on that for food, clothing, and shelter. So that's why I want to serve another 2 years.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Lots of topics to talk about. You all have some areas of specialty. That's great. So let's start with healthcare, since a number of you brought it up, and I know this is a particular topic for you, George. Yes. So lots of great ideas, but how do we limit the spending? What the cost is for folks who have to go out there and find insurance?
Well, as the only physician in the legislature for the past 10 years, I have a little bit of a unique perspective. But the real essence of limiting the cost is getting serious about prevention and using other policies to help with preventing health problems. The things that are so obvious, things like the tobacco policy, right? So what do we spend a year on tobacco-related diseases? We spend about $348 million a year on tobacco-related illnesses just in Vermont. Smokers die on average 10 years earlier than others. It accounts for about 1 in 5 deaths nationally. So it's still a huge problem. We've made some progress. We are at very high risk of losing that progress with the whole e-cigarette things. But one of the things that virtually costs nothing and has been proven in multiple places now to significantly reduce smoking is raising the smoking age to 21.
It really matters.
It really matters. It really matters because if you don't start smoking before you're 21, you're probably never going to start smoking. And when you raise the smoking age to 21, that means the 18 to 20-year-olds can't buy the cigarettes.
Is that really true?
Yes.
Can they really not get them?
Well, if you're enforcing properly. But we know that that's the group who provides 90% of the cigarettes to younger people.
Wow.
We also know that the earlier you start, the earlier you try nicotine, the more likely you are to be addicted. It takes less to get you addicted, and it's much harder to stop. So raising the age to 21, it started as a movement in one town down in Massachusetts. And that town is a Boston suburb, and they raised the age to 21. Here we hear people would just go across the border to buy it in New Hampshire. But guess what? They didn't even go across the town line down there. In just a few years, their smoking rate was 50% below the surrounding towns. 50% below. And that was the single intervention, was raising the smoking age. So we know it works. It's been done in multiple states now. We've passed it in the House. The House gets it. It came to a very close vote in the Senate, sadly. There were a couple of people who would shock you that they voted against it, but they did, and so it didn't pass. But we're going to give it a go again, because if you want to control your health care costs, this is low-hanging fruit. $348 million. If you cut your smoking rate in half, that's a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
There are other examples of that same kind of thing, where if we get serious about prevention. And we know what accounts for what causes 25% of cancers, 25% of heart disease, you know, a wide range of diseases, and we know how to reduce that.
Now, do you folks agree as well? Were you in support of this this change in the
Yeah,
in smoking
definitely.
age?
And
Yes.
I think we also need to tax e-cigarettes the same as we do
Absolutely.
And
regular
are they
cigarettes.
as addictive, e-cigarettes? I'm not familiar. I
Because they're
apologize.
nicotine delivery devices.
So it's just another way of smoking
Yeah.
a cigarette, essentially?
Sure.
It is.
No, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. We need
Yeah.
to put an excise tax just like we do regular
Oh,
tobacco.
so they're not taxed
No,
the same
they're
way as
not.
cigarettes?
They are only currently taxed with the
Sales
sales
tax.
tax.
Okay.
But we need to put a hefty,
Surcharge?
well, an excise tax on them at the distributor level, because we know that there are two groups that are most price sensitive with things like tobacco and e-cigarettes, and that's the younger people, and that's people of lower income. And those are both groups that we absolutely need to target if we're going to reduce our health care costs. The e-cigarettes are every bit as addictive. They do not really help people stop smoking. It's that, you know, it turns out that what it does is have people smoking two different things, and there's just no evidence that in the long run it reduces health risks by doubling up on the smoke. It may in fact make it worse, but it's going to take time to
Yeah.
prove that.
Yeah, they kind of snuck in before we were ready for them, it sounds like.
And the utilization is exploding in the teenagers, which is why I say we are about to start losing the war on cigarettes. They're much more expensive than cigarettes, and you know, over time, people will morph. It's clear that people who use e-cigarettes smoke more regular cigarettes and smoke longer. So.
Okay, so don't start.
Don't start, and those are things we need to do to control healthcare costs.
Okay, yeah. Let's switch, because you folks both talked about water quality and environment. Talk about some of the things we can do. I know people here are very concerned about Lake Champlain. We're hearing it all the time. We've got algae blooms, and the beaches in Burlington have been closed a lot lately, which I assume has other issues connected to that. But tell us what your ideas are for that. Trevor.
Well, there are two elements to it, right? We've had an ongoing conversation with the Environmental Protection Agency over nutrient load in the waters of the state of Vermont. And that's not just Lake Champlain, it's Lake Memphremagog, the Connecticut River watersheds, and even the North Hudson watersheds. And over time, there was an agreement made for a total maximum daily load for phosphorus loading in Lake Champlain, okay? Out of that came Act 64, which was passed in 2015, which is the Water Quality Act, if you will, for Vermont, where it looked at all the different sectors that contribute, not just in Lake Champlain, but those other watersheds I just talked about. And from that, the treasurer, the state treasurer, was tasked with looking at what it would cost to meet the requirements under the EPA and meeting some of the requirements under Act 64. And it was determined that we probably need, over and above what we already get for funding from various sources, about $25 million each year for the next 20 years. And in a sense, the total bill with all the revenue sources is about $2 billion over 20 years. So our big struggle, and one of the things we keep working on in our committee for over the last couple of years, is where are we coming up with the long-term funding to do this work, okay? And when the EPA gave us a report card this past year, I think they identified 28 areas that we were supposed to be working on. 25 of them were passed, if you will, and 2 being worked on and 1 not a pass. And the biggie, long-term funding. And there's been an over-reliance in this administration on the capital fund, which is bonded money, to help support that work or fill that hole. That's not sustainable over time. And we need to figure out how we're going to come up with that long-term funding. We have some money that comes from the property transfer tax, which is about $4 million a year that goes toward the Clean Water Fund. There's some additional monies that are going to move towards clean water funding called the sheets, which is the money tied up with bottle deposits and things like that. Right now, the distributors, if they don't reimburse, they get to keep that money. We're going to take that money and direct that towards water quality. And then we have capital bond funding that's filling in the rest of that. And we're still not getting to 25 million. We're only getting to about 18 or 19 million. And that's what the agencies are talking about in terms of moving forward in fiscal year 2020. That's not enough. And relying on the capital funding is not going to do it over the long term either. We don't have an answer. I was in a forum last week.
I was going to ask you that question, you know.
I mean, we presented ideas, and Representative Till would know that, because being on Ways and Means, we've actually submitted ideas or multiple ideas about where we could raise those funds. But I was in a forum last week where all the agency heads were present that are part of the Water Quality Initiative. And they're starting to realize that they have to come up with a long-term solution, that status quo of what they're doing is not going to work.
Yeah.
So one of the big problems is that there's a reluctance to actually do anything to raise the money. And
Seems to be a theme.
right, I mean, because there's, no new taxes, right?
Right.
So think about this. If you took the cost of 1 cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks a month, and take that $2 a month and put it on every property that's in Vermont, you could raise, what, $20 million? And that would go pretty far in raising the $25 million that we need each year to do that. I'm willing to give up a cup of coffee a month for this if it's going to help clean up the lake. Polluters need to pay. And who are the polluters? It's all of us. 40% of the phosphorus going into the lake, it comes from agriculture. Another 40% comes from our roads and our municipalities. And only 3% is actually coming from our wastewater treatment plants. So, we need to, everybody has to be in. We had that saying, all in, right? Everybody in, or whatever it was called when we did Act 64, was it?
Act 64.
We all have to be willing to contribute something in order to clean it up. If I may just add a comment to Representative Yantachka. One of the problems we have with the Federal Clean Water Act is the jurisdiction of the EPA and dealing with this problem. So if we don't come up, the EPA has basically said to Vermont, you come up with this idea and we'll work with you on that. If we fail to do that, the EPA could come in and tell us what we should do. But the EPA only has jurisdiction over point source pollution, not non-point source pollution.
Why don't you explain the difference, Beth?
Well, stuff running off of farm fields is non-point, running off of roads. Most of your point source pollution is wastewater, as Representative Yantachka was talking about. And that's the least contributing factor now. So if the EPA comes back and says you will do to meet these requirements, we're going to be spending a lot of money with very little benefit from that.
And that's a reality. This could very well happen.
So let me chime in just a bit. The EPA has set mid-2019 as the time by which we need to tell them what our long-term source is. Yet all of last year, 2 years, the administration came in time and time again and said, we don't need to identify a source now. We don't need a funding source now. There were a lot of thoughts about different funding sources. There were proposals about different funding sources. Ideally, in taxing, you want a nexus. You want some connection between what you're charging and and the purpose. You know, one of the suggestions that came from the Natural Resources Committee was a rooms tax, a surcharge on rooms. It is an issue in terms of our tourism. If our lake is awful, our tourism is going to tank. If we lose the Vermont brand by being obviously polluted, the tourism is going to get down the hill. And so, you know, I see a nexus there. A lot of other people didn't seem to see a nexus there. What makes the most intuitive sense to most of us, I think, was an impervious surface charge. So the whole state is being mapped for how much is impervious, because that's where the water runs from. And so you could conceivably look at each parcel, what amount is impervious, and charge a tax based on that. That makes the most sense. The problem is that A, it's going to be very expensive to set it up, and B, it has to be constantly updated because things are constantly changing. So it's not only a setup expense, but it's an ongoing expense. So the next proxy for that has been suggested is just a parcel fee. So rather than based on the actual physical setup of the parcel, that just parcels pay equally. And there are people who think that that isn't okay. Nobody is wildly enthusiastic about that, but people point out that, well, but some parcels, like forest lands, actually reduce the runoff, and yet we're going to charge them too. So it's a little bit messy, and it's all more complicated by the fact that the administration keeps insisting we don't need to identify more. And the last point I would make is, yeah, we're using a lot of bonding money, and who's going to pay that back? It's not us, it's our kids. And we're pushing this off onto our kids. We've created the pollution for profits and whatnot, but we're going to push this off onto our kids to pay for, and that's just not right.
And tell me, I know some of the towns have, I think it's per parcel fees or it's impervious surface fees that goes into their wastewater and stormwater, right?
Yes.
So is this sort of a similar thing to that? Have they been successful in figuring out those issues of impervious versus pervious and kind of keeping track? And does it make more sense at a town level than it does at a state level?
They're called stormwater utilities.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we have 4 of them right now. And they have been successful. And they take that money and reinvest that into stormwater mitigation and work like that, restoration work. And then the dilemma is that if we do move forward with some statewide program, where do they fit into that since they're already doing it,
I think I heard that at one of the forums. I think we had a chat about that, yeah. But obviously, I mean, they are kind of at the forefront, at least in Vermont, right, of trying to deal with some of those issues around their own raising funds for wastewater. I mean, it's just everyone's trying to raise funds for the things that are important, right, to all of us. So, okay, interesting. So let's, we touched a little bit on agriculture as part of this runoff and such. Let's talk a little bit about remaining dairy farms in Vermont. Not a whole lot left. You know, is this an important issue for us, and what can we do? Changing economy, you know, where do we go from here? And is this one of yours, Mike?
Well, it's not one of mine, but my thoughts on that are that dairy farmers right now are really being stressed because of the low price that they're getting for the milk. Mm-hmm. It costs them about $16 a hundredweight in order to break even, and they're only getting $12 to $14 per hundredweight right now. A couple of years ago, they were getting $18 per hundredweight, which was a really good year for them. I'm not exactly sure how the prices are set, but I know that they're pretty much dependent on what the co-ops that they're selling the milk to are giving them for it. And I don't know how those prices are set. When we go to the supermarket, we're paying $3 to $4 per gallon of milk. That's not what the farmers are getting. So I don't know how we deal with that. The Farm Bill did not pass in Congress, and that was legislation at the federal level that would have helped farmers, dairy farmers. So, yeah, we're losing farms, not a good thing. A lot of farms, though, are turning to beef cattle. I know at least one farm in Charlotte that converted from dairy to beef. And again, that I'm not sure exactly how they're marketing that, but I'm hoping they're doing well as a result.
Well, they're still in business.
They're still in business right
Something,
now.
yeah.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is that certainly there's a group, we've had a lot of conversation about we need to move away from conventional dairy farms to more like organic or beef or
Specialized kind of,
more
yeah.
specialized.
Yeah.
But it also begs the question, because when you have a conversation about what it would take to move to a more of organic practices and not specifically organic, but more natural processes, where's the market for all of that? And I think the market's not quite there either for everyone to move in that direction.
Okay. George, thoughts?
I agree with what's been said, but the only things I would add are, number one, I don't have very many positive things to say about the administration in Washington, but the one little piece of the trade deal is going to make for more milk exports to Canada, and that's a good thing for Vermont. That's one thing, and the other piece is, I think it partly it's going to take a commitment on the part of Vermonters in general to do more, pay more for local and organic stuff grown here in Vermont, and it's going to be a little more costly, but I think that's going to have to happen to save the farms.
And it's happening somewhat already?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
We have
is
a
that fair?
very
Yeah.
successful farm in my community, Jericho Settlers Farm. We see them at a lot of farmers markets. We see them at the market at the hospital every week. Lots of good things happening there. Lots of innovative thinking. So it's possible.
Yeah, we've seen.
I'm sorry, and if you move in that direction too, you're also having a more positive impact on the environment than these large conventional dairy farms. And I think that's important also.
And the non-dairy farms, we are seeing a growth in those, and there's still a small part of the agricultural economy, but they're growing.
Yeah.
So
Let's talk. I think this segues. Climate change.
climate change.
And
All right, I was waiting for that.
Yeah, I'm there. And it's actually kind of funny because the question that I have is, how can Vermont turn climate change to its advantage? And the only thing I can think about is, being out in my bikini in January. For some reason, that's what comes to mind. So I just love the way they worded that, because how do you turn that to your advantage? But I'm curious to hear what you have to say. And I also want to throw in something that Mike, you talked about, which was energy too, because I know that's not on here, and I think that's something, at least for me, those are connected.
Yeah, the
So
two
I
are
wanna
tied together very
talk about both.
closely.
So why don't you start us off?
So first of all, climate change can be looked at in a way that provides an opportunity to increase jobs. It could be a boon to the economy. We created, with renewable energy, our renewable energy policy has helped to create 19,000 jobs in Vermont since 2011. And we've also got an awful lot of homes and businesses that need to improve their weatherization. We need to do some investment though. Our goal was to have 80,000 homes weatherized, low-income family homes weatherized by 2020. We're way behind the curve on that. We are nowhere near getting that done. That's funded by the gross receipts tax, which is like at this point 0.75% on the price of oil that's brought into the state and passed on to the consumer, of course. So in a way, that's a little bit of a carbon tax, but it's a very tiny one. We have to get off fossil fuels. That's the only way we're going to impact climate change. Transportation and heating sectors are the two biggest components of greenhouse gas emissions. Instead of going down, which was the intent, greenhouse gas emissions actually went up, and it's primarily due to the transportation and heating sectors. Vehicles are becoming more efficient, but at the same time, more vehicle miles are being driven. And that's one of the reasons. So how do we get people to change? On the other hand, the electricity sector is becoming cleaner and cleaner because we've got the renewable energy standard that utilities are working to. And so what we need to do is we need to transition our transportation and heating from fossil fuels to electricity, cleaner electricity. And how do we do that? That's the big question. So you could do that either by mandate. Nobody likes mandates. You could do that by market forces. So what does that mean? Well, raise the price of fossil fuels and use the money you collect from that to help incentivize transitioning to electricity, to clean energy. So more electric vehicles, heat pumps for the home and business, and those types of things. So I was on a ad hoc group of legislators that put together a plan called the Essex Plan, which would have put a gradually increasing price on carbon pollution, price per gallon of fossil fuel, and use those revenues. The plan in the Essex Plan was to use those revenues to reduce your electricity bill for both businesses and for individuals. 4-cent per gallon tax would raise about $30 million a year. If we take 10% of that, $3 million a year, and we took that and put it into the same fund that is used for weatherization, we could increase the number of houses that are insulated better so that they don't use as much fuel to heat. So there are economic opportunities for all Vermonters if we are willing to make the investment and address climate change. But we have to be willing to do it. We just can't wish this problem away.
It seems to be the theme in many of the issues that we're talking about tonight. We can't wish them away. Trevor, your thoughts?
Well, I would just add that, and I can't think of who the firm is right now, but we just passed legislation last year that allocated about $100,000, maybe $120,000, to do a study on carbon pricing and look at some different options. One of them is the Essex Plan. The other one is Western Climate Initiative, and please correct me if I get any of this wrong.
Right.
You're the expert. And that's more of a cap and trade. That's actually a number of states, and also Quebec is part of that. And I listened to a presentation of their program more than a number of months ago now, but I was very impressed with that. And there's about 3 or 4, maybe 5 items that this research firm is looking at and is to present a report back to us. Do you recall when it's?
In January.
January, I believe it is. I can't think of the name of the firm at this point.
The initials RFT comes to mind, but I'm not sure.
But we had a forum last week where various stakeholders in the public could come to a forum and talk about how they wanted to make sure that the direction they were taking was what the public was looking for and the people.
And did that indeed happen?
That happened last week, and I thought it was pretty positive.
Good.
The thing, another point
Then we'll
is
let you
that
go, George. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make the point that we can't do it ourselves. Vermont by itself is not going to do this. And there are a number of approaches we can use to do this, to help people transition from fossil fuels. But we're working with other states. There's a group of us that are working with legislators in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, New York, and even Montana, Oregon, Washington, to kind of put a national focus on pricing carbon pollution.
Well, I think Michael just stole the point that I would have made, and that is that if Vermont stopped producing CO2, it wouldn't change the trajectory of global warming. And we can't do this alone, and we have to be very careful that we don't hinder ourselves economically. This needs to be a regional thing, and it's that's why the importance of working with legislators from other places. This needs to be at minimum regional. Given what's happened nationally, it's very frightening. right now, and you know, clearly, what we can do here by ourselves is completely inadequate. So so it is going to take a group of states together to do it, because it's certainly not coming out of Washington.
And it sounds like that's happening at least at some level now.
It's
yes?
happening at some level now.
Actually, we have a very successful regional initiative called the Greenhouse Gas Initiative, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI. And what that is, that pertains to the electric sector. And the trade in clean, what do they call it, clean energy credits or renewable energy credits, and the amount of carbon that's reduced by changing our electric utilities over to renewable energy are traded among the states. And that provides actually quite a bit of money for Vermont utilities, saving us more than $400 million over the years that that's been in effect on our electric rates.
How are the electric utilities doing in terms of moving toward 100% renewable? That sounds like what the goal is, yes?
Yeah, the goal is 90% renewable by 2050. But the utilities are doing very well. Burlington Electric is 100% renewable.
Woohoo.
And so is Washington Electric Co-op. Vermont Electric Co-op is getting there. And so is Green Mountain Power. Well, Green Mountain Power right now is about 60% renewable.
Okay. And is it hard to make that move from 60? I mean, 60 to 90 sounds like a lot. I don't know.
Well,
is that reasonable? In how many years is that?
a lot of it is in accounting, because it's based on renewable energy credits.
Okay.
And you can have more renewable energy. Right now, let's see, starting in 2017, there was an increase in the percentage of renewable energy that the utilities had to be at each year, and it increases each year. So if they've actually got renewable energy credits in excess of that, they can sell those excess renewable energy credits to Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, whatever, and they would get some money for that, which would offset the amount of the charges that we have to pay for electricity. So that's been a successful program. Pertains only to electricity. There's talk about actually extending it to transportation.
That would be a huge impact,
Yes.
from what it sounds like, because transportation is such a big user, right?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Interesting. Is that moving along in the legislature? Is that being talked about?
Well, it's something that's being talked about.
Yeah.
That's about where we're at right now, talking.
Yeah.
It's not something that we could legislate alone.
Yeah, right. It has to be through
Takes
your
coordination,
regional groups.
and,
yeah.
and because of that, it really also is going to take governors from multiple states to be on board with it too.
Yeah. Leadership. Right? And that's what
Right.
this is all about in the end, yes?
About in the end.
Be somebody that's willing to walk the walk.
Yeah, or
and not
you know,
just
get
talk
out in
the
front.
talk.
Yeah. So we have a few minutes left. Let's talk. We've covered a lot of topics here. Thank you all for being so game. Let's talk a little bit about education. You know, concern. How do we maintain the quality of education at the same time when we have declining school-age populations? Trevor, why don't we start with you?
Whoa.
Oh, we could start with somebody else.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah, George actually is much
George,
more
go
familiar
for
with
it,
the
George.
education piece
Okay.
because of his background. So
That's right.
yes.
That's right.
So yeah, I spent 15 years on the school board, a lot of it making budgets. That's how I got into this mess in the first place.
Okay. Entry points.
You know, I'm not so as worried about the quality of the education as I am about the equality and the equality of opportunities across different districts, and the cost and how we're going to fund it. You know, when we go around knocking on doors, which we've all done over the last 10 years, I can say far and away the most common complaint I get is about property taxes. And we have chosen to fund education through property taxes, and that causes a bit of a problem. You know, if you look at our taxes compared to other states, and the Joint Fiscal Office does this every year, and the Tax Foundation does this every year. The one that's actually really consistently very, very high is our property taxes. And, you know, so we need to control the costs, and there are a couple big initiatives around that. One is school mergers, which I can say we did in Chittenden East, and it has paid real dividends. But so that helps. But then there's also, this past year, we worked on special education and how we deliver it, and doing a very, very different paradigm with special education, which I think is going to go a long way towards helping contain the costs in special education instead of the very regimented federal plan, more allowing the school districts to manage more how they do their special education. So I think that those are steps into cost control. I think that the mergers are important for opportunity. You know, in our district we had 6 elementary schools. You know, 3 of them barely more than a mile from each other, and you know, the larger one had more programs that our kids would have loved, but we couldn't afford in our little school. You know, the merger has allowed us to do things like that, like foreign language in elementary school. I mean, that's tremendous. But the mergers allowed us to do that. And so, you know, it's the opportunities, the breadth of opportunities. You know, over and over again, we're ranked as one of the 5 or 6 best school systems in the country, in public school systems. And that is a huge piece of attracting people to Vermont. You know, it's something we should be celebrating, selling, you know, and making fuss about.
Well, and you were the one who said that you felt like there was too much negativity. So
Yes.
that sounds like that's when we have. Although I think we are known for that. I mean, I think we are. That is out there. That the education system here is good, amongst other things. But Mike, did you want to add anything to that?
No, not really. We're trying to support 30,000 fewer children with the same infrastructure pretty much that we had when, you know, 30,000 kids ago. And so therefore,
Where'd they all go?
I'm not sure whether I said that exactly right. We're
Well, we know what you
30,000
meant,
kids
yeah.
less,
Yeah.
and we got the same infrastructure, and
that's 30,000
that,
kids
of
less
course, the cost per
overall?
student is going to be.
Yeah.
That's over since, what, 2010,
Really?
2009? I don't know.
Like 10 years.
Over
Yeah.
10 years or
It's
so.
about
Yeah.
10 years,
10 years,
30,000
yeah.
kids.
30,000 kids, yeah.
This is that big boom of
Because-
kids. Is that
Yes.
this-
Yeah,
the
because-
demographics?
Yeah, it's sort of flattened
The
off now, I
demographic
think.
is graying. You know, the Vermont
Yes.
population is graying. We're part of it. I am anyway. And so, you know, we need to attract younger families into Vermont. And one of the ways to do that is to make Vermont more affordable. How do you do that? Well, one way is to help reduce the cost of childcare. And that's a big negative when it comes to somebody that wants to move to Vermont that has kids, because you've got to either have one parent staying at home, or else if both parents are working, and we have a lot of two career families, one of the parents is going to be paying a huge percentage of their income for childcare. And so that's another thing where we have to invest in order to make things better for all Vermonters. So that's my take on it.
Okay. Trevor, would you like to add something?
Well, 2 things, I guess.
One thing. We have time for one thing.
One thing. Well, there was a study that was recently, done in the last year or so, that looked at, there's been a lot of conversation about we're spending too much money in our educational system. And I think when you look at the sort of what I call the general educational piece of it, people seem to think, the research seems to show, we're doing just about right. And back to Representative Till's comment about it's the special education piece in particular that's out of whack. And that we need to get away from that regimented structure and provide more flexibility within the schools. Think block grants and let them decide how best to utilize those debt funding streams. So that's the one thing I would add.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. We're out of time. Thank you for joining me tonight.
That's too
Appreciate
bad. I
it.
had
Went
something else
fast,
to
right?
add,
I know. We could have done another hour. You'll have to come back again.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, of course. And I want to let everyone know, don't forget, you can vote now. You can vote early at your town or city hall. I always forget to say that, so I want to make sure I got that in there. Or you can vote on Election Day, Tuesday, November 6th. And be sure to stay tuned to Channel 17 because we're going to have lots more election coverage for you. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.